What is up, everybody? Welcome to Comic Book Club. I'm Alex, and as you might notice, Pete and Justin are both out tonight, but luckily we have a guest co-host who is jumping in the breach here. Ladies and gentlemen, from the Vactor-Verse Podcast, Vactor, thanks so much for coming, dude.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I can't wait to talk all things comics with you. This is the best place for it. Comic Book Club. Woo!
I'm very excited to have you here. Now, we'll do a little bit more of an intro in a second, but just a note, wherever you're listening to this show, if you're watching live on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, it's all good. If you're listening later on Spotify, not Stitcher, because I found out today that Stitcher is shutting down at the end of August. So if you're subscribed to our show through Stitcher, please don't do that anymore. You can go literally anywhere else on the internet, any other podcast service. You can check out our podcast. But if you're listening on Stitcher right now, very important, unsubscribe from that. Subscribe somewhere else. There you go. A little bit of business at the top, I guess. But Vactor, we were going to have you on as a guest anyway before Justin and Pete totally ditched me tonight. So I was very excited you're jumping in as a co-host. You had us on your podcast a couple of months back. Very, very briefly, just to let people know, what's your podcast about? I think they'll find the concept kind of similar.
Yeah, I try to have comic book content creators, I should say, on the show and talk to them about their canon event, what they kind of got them into comic books. And I'm also trying to expand it to include more Star Wars content, because that's one of my passions. So I'm trying to get more Star Wars content creators on, but that's basically the gist of it.
Well, when we last talked, again, this was a couple of months ago, Across the Spider-Verse hadn't come out yet, and I know you were very excited for that. Now that it's been out for a while, what's your opinion? How did it strike you? Did it live up to your expectations?
100%. It is my favorite film of the year. I was blown away by the evolution from Into the Spider-Verse to Across the Spider-Verse, and it was a little bittersweet because at the end of it, I said, there's no way Beyond the Spider-Verse can top this. There's no way. This movie is so good. I cannot fathom them improving on it. So I was like, man, I really want to see the next one, but I also don't want to see it because I want to preserve my memory of Across the Spider-Verse as this great piece of art. But yeah, it blew me away. I could not have been more pleased with the results of it.
Well, I'll tell you what, it's probably not going to come out for a very long time. So you can sit with Across the Spider-Verse for a while. So you'll be good.
Yes.
But I'm glad you liked it. I'm glad it was good. We'll talk a lot more about your show, but I do want to bring in our guest tonight. Very excited to chat with him. You might know him as Baby Daddy from Scissor Sisters, or for more recent comic book fans, you might know him as the writer of the awesome book Nostalgia on Comixology. Ladies and gentlemen, Scott Hoffman. Hello, Scott. Welcome.
What's going on? How are you?
Oh my gosh, very good, because you are here now. I'm very excited to talk about this book. We reviewed the first issue of the book on our Stack podcast and absolutely were blown away by it. Now, all 5 issues are out on Comixology and available. This is a wild book. I certainly have a lot of questions that I want to ask you about it, but do you want to
Hope I can answer them.
We'll see what happens. Yeah, well, if anybody could, I feel like you could.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. I probably know more than most.
Yes, but what would you say the pitch of the book is?
The book is a dystopian sci-fi kind of cyberpunk inspired story about a musician past his prime. You can't imagine where I got that idea from, right? But a musician who's kind of looking back at his life, reassessing sort of how he did what he did, is this sort of like this superstar that used his memories as a type of technology to create music and share his memories and his life with his fans. And then it follows the story of him later in life, some kind of shady characters popping around, and revolutionary group getting him into trouble, and goes from his past, and all kind of stuff pops up.
One of the things that I really loved about this book, and I mean, I know you just touched on this a bit, but everybody talks about, music could change the world, but in this book, this guy literally changes the entire world with music. I assume that's at least part of what you started with, right? Is sort of the germ of the idea, or did that come to you later?
Yeah, well, I think when we talk about music changing the world, I don't think it's a huge exaggeration or really even like a huge sci-fi concept to think about how impactful music can be on our lives and how impactful music can be on culture. I think it just depends what your vantage point is, right? Like when I was 15 years old, like hiding in my bedroom with like what would it have been, like an Alice in Chains cassette tape, you know, playing it on repeat. That was everything that existed in my world at the time. And it really did kind of shape who I was, you know, whether it was at different times, you know, hair metal or Nine Inch Nails or Radiohead or whatever phase I was in at that time. That really was the center of my universe, especially in pre-internet days when I didn't have access to a million things. So yeah, I do think that was important to me. But actually, I would say if you want to talk about like the impetus of this book, like what the seed of this was, I'm really interested in the idea of memory and about what music can do to bring us into kind of different states of consciousness, but also to transfer our experiences, our consciousness to someone else. It's a very visceral, as I say, maybe technology, even music itself, that allows us to share our experiences with someone else in a really sort of profound and like primal way.
That's interesting. I mean, not to get too philosophical about it, but I guess you've already gone there, so it's all good. So your feeling is that almost quite literally when you are creating or you're playing music, you're connecting with the other person?
I mean, you tell me. Yeah, I mean that's how I feel. Yeah, I hope I'm right about that. I think other people have probably, you know, can probably relate to this. So I think what sci-fi does really well is take a philosophical concept like that and make it into something real that is only something we can really imagine. So what if this idea of what I really do think music does is taken more literally, and we have an example of direct memory sharing and experience sharing with people.
Why this particular type of musician? Because I think people would expect in a certain way that'd be like, oh, it's the Scissor Sisters. That's the Scissor Sisters in there, but it's not. It's, I don't know. It's not exactly like a David Bowie-esque, though there's some of that imagery in there a little bit. Who are you pulling on in particular, and why go in that direction, at least in terms of the main character?
I think I was inspired by the idea of kind of like, I don't know if it directly links more into my past as a music fan, because I don't know if the references were as important to me as some other musical references in my life, but I really thought about the sort of loneliest, most codependent maybe type of music genres that are out there, and especially that were out there as inspirations to me. And I don't know if codependent's the word, but if you know what I mean, you think about the sort of gothy genres and the sort of the sort of like, you know, dark 80s synth you know, new wave synth music that was kind of like, at least the people I knew, and in those moments that I really loved that music, it felt very singular. Like I was really my saddest thoughts and my sort of loneliness was just projected right back at me from these artists. It was a little more emotional than disco, I could say, which, you know, not to diminish disco, but, you know, it's a different feeling, right? And dystopia to me is kind of more of a kind of gothy sentiment. I wanted him a little goth.
We got a comment here from Stray Bullet who says, if Sid Vicious and David Bowie had a child, it would be the guy on the cover. Do you feel like that kind of encapsulates it a little bit?
It's funny. I didn't really think about Sid Vicious because, you know, I don't want to give away too much spoiler in this, but I think Sid Vicious, and I love this. I think that's really interesting. And I think what anyone pulls from it is just as correct as what I have to say. But to me, Sid Vicious was sort of our antagonist in the book's philosophy. I think the idea with the character Craig, who goes by Nostalgia, I think his real reason to exist and his sort of philosophy is that he's a revolutionary guy that sort of has a sense of purpose and a sense of responsibility to the world. And I think the punk rock ethic may have been about anarchy and destruction. So he's maybe in between those things. Bowie was definitely there. but there was just like a little. It was almost like the nihilism was turned inward. That's the stuff I was thinking about, not the sort of outward anarchy, but the sort of like nihilism of the Depeche Mode or Nine Inch Nails, another one I just was obsessed with as a younger person.
This is from Martin Costanzo. Says, great to see BD doing an amazing job as a writer. He is really talented, which is a lovely
Very
statement.
kind.
I was curious, what made you turn to writing and comic book writing in particular? What drew you to that?
It's a funny one. Jake and I, Jake was my partner in creating the band. We both were studying creative writing in our college years. Jake was in a program. I was in a program along with my English major, and we were like voracious readers. Some comics. I was a little more into comics than he was, but a lot of fiction, a lot of genre fiction, a lot of horror, a lot of weird. If you want to talk about like the sort of genre of weird fiction, that's sort of a thing, capital W weird, or like or a bit of sci-fi, which was more me than him. But we were trading books back and forth. We were always talking about the stuff we loved. And I think in a way, Scissor Sisters was a storytelling, world building venture. We kind of almost jokingly said that to ourselves, that wouldn't it be fun if we had like, we're not just Scissor Sisters. Everyone who wants to be a part of this, they're all Scissor Sisters. We're all Scissor Sisters. It's a whole thing, and you could be a part of this world, and it's a place where you can kind of feel like comfortable or feel like you belong. So there was a world building and a kind of storytelling aspect, and especially with the lyrics, which were more Jake's. There were a lot of stories being told and a lot of fantasy in those stories. So it felt natural. And then I was like, oh, I had wanted to be a writer. Jake had wanted to be a writer. He's now written a memoir and plans to write fiction, I believe. And like the band was like a detour, and I wanted to also write books. So I don't know if that answers.
Yeah, I think so. That's
Martin, or sorry, whoever that.
Yeah,
was.
Martin.
Yeah,
that's a big detour that you took for a while, then, I guess, to finally make your way into the comic book industry.
12-year detour, and then another 8 years post band, making music for other people and working on TV shows.
You hear a lot of pop stars these days do that. Like they get into pop stars specifically so that they can write comic books eventually. Is what they're heading for.
It seems to be a pattern. I mean,
a little bit. I'm joking.
Yeah. No, it like there's a few out there. I was actually a little worried. No, but you look at like, I actually had this funny moment where I was like, I want to read more comics about rock stars, right? Like, is there a genre? Are there stories out there? Is it just Dazzler, or is it like there are other things I can sort of look at? And I accidentally got a list of people in rock and roll making comics, and I looked down this list and I was like, oh my God, there's like tons of like Courtney Love had a comic, and the guy from Rage Against the Machine had a comic, and all this stuff. I was like, oh God, am I just like another one in line? I know you're joking again, but it was like, is this vanity project, take 37 here? But
I think
maybe it was.
No, I don't think it was. And I'm not just saying this because you're the guest. Like we on the show, I don't want to totally speak for Pete and Justin because they're not there. And Vactor, I don't know if you have the same reaction, but often when you see somebody who has some sort of celebrity status in a book, you're like, all right, prove it to me. You cross your arms a little bit and get ready for it. But this is a comic first. Like that's one of the big stepping stones that I think you need to get across. And the fact that it is so visual, and you are experimenting with so many visual ideas, and the way that the book visually represents music as well. There's many different layers and paths to the story that we haven't talked about. I was very surprised and very impressed by it. So
appreciate that.
Good job.
Thank you. I'm a big fan of the form, and when I decided to kind of start with comics, I will say I was talked into it when I first started a few years ago at the beginning of the pandemic by my friend Phil Jimenez, who I don't know if he's been on the show before, but I'm sure you know his work. And he was just a friend of mine for years from New York. They're mutual friends. And he said, would you join this writing group if we decide to do this? So what I got from him was not a lot of fluffy feedback, a lot of honest feedback, but also I had a lot of questions about how comics work from the inside, a lot about process, a lot about scripting, a lot about how you actually organize this whole thing. And I did a lot of studying. I read a lot. I I kind of broke things down a lot to try to figure this out.
I love to hear that, because I do think oftentimes this isn't just people with celebrity backgrounds, but just regular people jump and they're like, well, I've read a comic or two. I could write a comic. That's easy. But it's a serious skill. So the fact that you spent the time to really teach yourself and learn that, I think that's very cool. And obviously,
Yeah.
Phil Jimenez is probably a pretty good teacher or aid in this process as well.
It's a natural I don't know, it's a natural way for him to sort of exist as a sort of teacher, but also he does professionally teach comic art and writing as well, and he's got the credentials to back it up. Yeah.
I am curious, though, on the opposite direction. This is still your first comic. So what mistakes did you make? What was something that happened with the first issue that you're like, oh, whoops, and then maybe pivoted a little bit for the next couple?
Well, if you're willing to talk again in a few months or in a year or whatever, I'll have my next book out, and that's actually the first one I wrote. They were released in reverse order. I was like an old pro by this one. I mean, I'm kidding. I wasn't really, but I do make all kinds of mistakes. I think there were a lot of rewrites of this one, a lot of very bad ideas that came into trying to, because my thing is vibe. My thing is there was sorry, I'm going to segue a little bit, but there's like a Grant Morrison Invisibles collected edition that has extra material in the back, and there's this really cool letter. I think it might be in the first or second volume. That's his pitch to DC for Invisibles, which is just as crazy as you might imagine it is. But he's basically like, it's about this and it's about this and this happens, but really, I just want a comic to talk about all the shit I love to talk about. That's what I want Invisibles to be. I want it to be the things that are on my mind now, and everything else is there because it has to be there. And I kind of like felt that way a little bit about this in the beginning. So the plot structuring was really hard for me, and I think I made a lot of mistakes there. And even dialogue is tough for me. I'm not an A+ person at dialogue, but one thing I realized I could do is create atmosphere. And when I'm in his head, I'm comfortable with that voice, and I'm comfortable with inner voice. So the rest of it, yeah, I think it's full of mistakes. I think it's like I'm learning, but their mistakes are also like really beautiful to me. And I look back at my band's music, and some of our best moments were mistakes where we didn't know the rules and lucked into some weird things.
Yeah, I love that too.
Yeah.
Vactor, you look like you want to ask a question.
Yeah, I was going to say
sorry,
that...
with Vactor.
No, that's fine. Vactor's being very polite. I understand that you're new to the show, but go ahead, ask a question.
And I just cut me off because I never stopped talking.
No worries. I was going to ask you, so like you said, this was your second one, so it came out very polished. Like it felt like this was a professional, like you've been doing it for years. So kudos, number one, for
Appreciate
just
that.
the work that you put in on nostalgia. But I was going to ask you for your thoughts kind of on the dystopian and the future aspect of it. Do you feel like with certain artistic ventures, whether it's movies or, whatever, video games, comic books, the dystopian future, is it more a cautionary tale of, hey, this is the way it could go, this is the way that our technology is leading us, or is it more a promise of the future of, hey, this is the technique's going to be so good in this aspect? How do you kind of look at the future and the dystopian elements of it, cyberpunk and all that?
That's great. It's a tough one because I wrote this at the beginning of the pandemic, or in the first year of the pandemic, and the world was changing a lot, but the world changed also a lot since the time that I wrote it. And accuracy of the future kind of really started to bother me, and I started to wonder if I needed to change plot points right up into the last minute. I had this whole idea of these consoles who are the sort of like Eastern Bloc, it's China, it's Russia, it's all these things. We had the Ukrainian gazillionaire who's kind of running his own revolutionary thing, and then everything happens with Russia and Ukraine, and then I'm like, oh, do I have to rethink this? And then I just thought about the whole philosophy of what future is in a book, and I just sort of went back to that kind of this is definitely a philosophy I'm sort of cognizant of in sci-fi, is that sci-fi is really about the moment that we're in more than what we think that moment will be. I didn't want this to feel like a crystal ball. I didn't want to feel like I was trying to make these sort of long-term predictions about where we were going to be. I just wanted to make a world that felt only slightly off from ours right now, and that was just something that exists there as a tool for me to write a story. Because I'm going to get it wrong no matter what. It's just going to look wrong in 20 years. So kind of take that into account. And to me, it's a setting I love. It's a setting that I have a certain amount of nostalgia for, so to speak. And, you know, and that's where I wanted it to be, but I also wanted it to feel just like that moment I was in, sitting in my house, thinking about the world falling apart, which everyone probably feels in the moment that they're living in. And that's what the future was for me. It was now. It's just an extreme version of now.
I wanted to ask you one that's sort of like a perennial question that I always am very interested in whenever we're talking about comic books that involve music. You're probably aware of this, but comic books don't have sound to them, you know, like they have a lot of things.
I've heard that, yeah.
But they don't have that. And it's always fascinating to me how people try to depict music in different ways on the comic book page. I'm sure at least a little bit of this, if not a lot of bit of this, was up to the artist that you were working with, but what was your take there? What was important in terms of visually representing audio on the still comic book page?
Another great question. I had a couple great editors on this book, and I should say with every compliment you give, I was lifted up by this incredible artist, Daniel Jaget, with the colorist, Lilu Ridge, with the letterer, Steve Wands, and my two editors who are DC and Vertigo legends, Will Dennis and Greg Lockard. Greg specifically was a big fan of this book, but also gave me the warning at the beginning. I mean, when we were starting this, he was a fan of the script, and he said, comics with music rarely work. This is a philosophy we've had over at Vertigo, at least for a long time. And it's a very tough thing to pull off because, as you said, you can't hear what's going on. So in my mind, I wanted the music to serve as a metaphor. I wanted it to simply serve as an experience, as something that is represented with words and imagery, and has to be imagined, and is probably unimaginable, is probably so far into the future that we couldn't conceptualize how this would feel. Also, something I mentioned specifically in the book is our hero sort of says in a moment, you know, I was making, you know, the only way to really think about this music is in small moments of infinite possibilities. So this was music that was constantly changing, constantly metamorphosing, I think is the word, but like it, I decided to present it more in this sort of cyberpunk fashion, in that it was like computer code. So I sort of wrote the lyrics more as a bit like computer code that could be seen as instructions for the music more than a representation of what the lyrics were themselves.
Well,
that's
I definitely
interesting.
Yeah.
Go ahead, sorry
Vactor.
to cut you off, Alex.
No, that's great.
I've seen it in so many different comics where sometimes, like, you think about like Scott Pilgrim, you'll see like sheet music or something. It'll be like, hey, this is the actual song. This is the like, if you can read sheet music, this is what it sounds like. I've seen people before. I think it was like phonograph, where it was like, this is our playlist, so listen to this while you're reading the comic. So I've seen different approaches like that, and that is
I think Youth for the Comixology book actually did that as well. So there's like each chapter has like sort of a song. Yeah, it's a really cool thing. I was thinking in terms of what if we can never hear this? I mean, I was actually asked the question, well, you know, did you want to make music to go along with it? And I'd love to hear what someone else imagines that music to sound like. But to me, the magic in it is that I'm always gonna be able to imagine that in a way that's better than the reality would be.
Right. We got a nice comment here from Starpad, says, was blown away from nostalgia. Can't wait to see what BD has to offer going forward. There was huge ambition for a debut project. Now, I know that you have a earlier project that's going to come out next. Is there anything that you can tease about or talk about with that, or is it too early for that?
No, I mean, there's been a couple teases. IGN did a tease of a few pages there, and a bit of the theme, and it was a funny kind of pairing because it's another dystopian book, but it's and thank you, by the way, for those comments. But I should have said that to begin with. But
it's implicit.
The new book,
you're okay.
Yeah, no. I'm always thankful. But the new book is called WAG, and it's about another fear I had during the pandemic and recent times, which varied a little from the sort of fear of loneliness that nostalgia may be, or the fear of looking back at your past and maybe thinking that it wasn't exactly what you thought it was. There's a million things there, but this one was the fear of mental illness and what happens when the pills are gone. And I know I've heard, since I've talked about this with people, that other people sort of share this fear, this worry that what would happen to the world, but these things that we take for granted. I love the idea of taking on tropes in not just science fiction, but genre. And I've written, actually I have a ton of scripts that I still am, hoping to get made into books. But this was specifically, to me, another take on a very common trope, which, if the last one was cyberpunk, this is sort of our Mad Max post-apocalyptic world, but in the mind, and what happens when someone who might hear voices in their head has no way to do anything about this, and where this would lead them.
So now you were down in San Diego Comic-Con this past weekend, right?
That's right.
Is that correct? How does the crowd at a Comic-Con compare to the crowd at a Scissor Sisters show?
Well, don't get me in trouble here. I'm always told to temper my expectations on the amount of people that may be there. I mean, literally, with my band in our best days, we're playing to stadiums full of people. It's a smaller industry. It's a smaller fan base. Not to say I think in a way, it's a really friendly fan base that is super engaged. So to me, I love the idea of the accessibility that I felt, that if someone wants to talk about the books. I felt this a lot at WonderCon as well. Like, they'll just come up, ask you questions. They seem really well read on what I'm putting out there. And, a lot of times, I'm not saying our Scissor Sisters fans weren't deep fans, but sometimes you go to a concert just to have fun and hear music. And it's just a different kind of experience. That the people coming to these cons are really in love with comic books. And
bring it back to what we were talking about earlier, do you at all feel that same sort of connection between the creator and the audience from comic books that you felt from music, or is it too much of a different medium?
No, I have to say I found that really interesting, because when I knew a lot of comics from my past, but I did not follow the creators in any meaningful way. I mean, I knew of Neil Gaiman, I knew of a bit about Grant Morrison, although I didn't know a lot about Grant. But with music, I would always deep dive, and I would always really know the personalities. And you go to the show, you see them. Something really cool about comics that attracted me to comics, and also to prose writing as well, was the ability for the stars, the talent, creators, whatever, to take a back seat. And I really admire that about the medium. I do think there are a lot of people within the comics world that wish it wasn't that way, and wish they were rock stars to some degree. But it's so freeing to me to just say, like, people are most likely going to judge me on this book alone, and not what I say over social media. And that's just not true in the music world.
Yeah. So just to kind of wrap things up here, Nostalgia, all 5
No!
issues. I'm sorry.
No.
Nostalgia, all 5 issues. You can get them on Comixology now. Is this, I know some Comixology books get collected at Dark Horse and other publishers. Is that going to happen with this as well?
I believe everything so far has gone through Dark Horse.
Okay.
Let's just say, like, fingers crossed, because nothing really to announce yet. But it will be collected, I believe, early to mid next year. I don't have a date on that yet, but a really cool collection with some extra stuff, some cool script stuff and drawings and stuff like that. And then a physical will come next year as well. And then onto WAG, which will do the same process. And I believe Comixology, for any books that are serialized, has the same process. They always end up collected. It will be a digital collection first.
Awesome.
And the spiel being that if you have Amazon Prime, Comixology Unlimited, or Kindle Unlimited, it is free. Just go on the site, download it, or download it on your Kindle app, or read it on your Comixology app, whatever you want. And for now, you got to do the issues. I'm not a floppies guy. I wait for collecteds myself, so I don't blame anyone for waiting. But yeah, it's all 5 issues available.
And are you, it seems like you're in it to win it now in terms of comic books. Like you've got Nostalgia, you got WAG coming up. Are you planning on doing more? Are you sticking with this?
Oh yeah, no, I think 8 more finished scripts, and I just want to go. I just want to go. Yeah.
Awesome.
Still writing. I'm probably, like sick of those and excited about this new one I'm writing, and like is what it is. But I have to say Phil Jimenez, mentor Phil, really opened the floodgates for me. He kind of showed me the way, and I was like, oh wow, I think I get it. I mean, I had to figure out how to throw everything onto spreadsheets and organize myself. Like, I'm on a crime scene doing like the red string all over everything. But I think I have a kind of form that I use now, and it's been really fun. And I'm just like, I'm going. So yes, I would love more books out. If anyone wants to draw any of my books, let me know. Because
you should get Phil Jimenez is a very good artist.
We've talked about it a lot. Phil keeps himself busy. We definitely discussed a couple projects. There's a script that he is begging for me to do, which I mean it's an absolute yes from me. But it's also 300 pages, and he draws the most detailed work you've ever seen, and it takes him a minute. So I'd rather him go to someone that's just gonna pay him a bunch of money.
No, you gotta lock him up. You gotta get him to do it. Love to see it.
I know. I'd love it. I would love it. Yeah. Hopefully there'll be some sort of collaboration. Yeah.
All right. Well, fingers crossed. Scott, thank you so much for coming on. Absolute pleasure. Congratulations on all the success, and hopefully we'll have you back on to talk about WAG.
Yes, I would love to. Thank you for having me, and thank you for the wonderful review back a couple months ago. Really appreciate it. Meant a lot. I listened.
Thank you for listening. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming on, Scott.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Be good.
Bye.
Take care.
All right. There we go. Once again, the book is called Nostalgia. It is out now from Comixology, all 5 issues by Scott Hoffman. Like I said, if you got a Prime membership, you can get it totally free right now. If you don't have a Prime membership, you can still get it. You can still get the book and head over there. Probably by getting a Prime membership, but I don't know. I don't work for Amazon. Don't ask me these questions. All right.
I was going to say, I actually got
please.
It with Comixology. I was surprised because I'm one of those dummies that subscribes to all 3: Amazon Prime, Kindle Unlimited, and Comixology Unlimited. So it was just there. I just opened up my Kindle and it was there, and I was like, whoa. So
amazing. Yeah, it's the sort of thing, like, legitimately, I don't want to promise this, but this is definitely true. If you take a break from listening to the show, walk to your front door, open it up, it's there. Nostalgia is there right now outside of your door. It's everywhere, baby. All right. We're going to move on with our next section, which is my favorite section because you all make it up. It is your audience questions. And for audience questions, all you got to do is drop a question about absolutely anything. Could be comic books, could be films, could be TV, could be movies, could be love advice if you want. In the comments on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitch. Can't do that on Twitter because Twitter is bad now. But before we get into it, we usually talk about at this point of the show what we're drinking. Vactor, I don't think you're drinking anything, but we did have our Brett Macris, Stray Bullet, our CBC chef. He curates a drink every week. This week, he curated just grab your favorite beer. That's all he did. So, so I grabbed a, what did I grab? A Lagunitas Hazy Wonder IPA, which very nice, very light. Definitely recommended. So there you go.
Nice.
All right.
It's 117 here.
Oh my God. Really?
Yeah. In Arizona, we're in a heat wave. It's been like the most consecutive days, whatever. It's been very hot over here. So I am sweating at the moment, even though I got the
Wait, I have to ask you something. I should have looked into this, but this was one of those things that I saw on the internet. I was like, oh my God, I should check if that's true, and then never did. I read something that the sidewalk is so hot, people have been getting third-degree burns in Arizona and dying. Is this true? I haven't seen
that, but I've seen people cooking eggs on the sidewalk just to see if they could do it.
Gross.
But I haven't seen anybody getting burned or dying. But that's not great if that's happening.
Do they eat the eggs afterwards?
I don't think so. I think it's just for TikTok, just for the
Okay.
gram. I don't think they're actually eating them, but it has been sweltering. And it's normally hot anyways in July in Arizona, but this year it is super hot. It is
Oof.
mega hot.
What? I have an audience question for you. Why do you live there?
Actually, it goes way back to my family. My brother and sister went to college here, and they just kind of stayed here. I was after touring the globe. My dad was in the Air Force, so we were kind of all over the place. I said, "Where would I land?" And my brother's here, my sister's here. I'm going to go to Arizona. And then once I got here, it was like, man, there's comic shops everywhere. There's all kind of stuff to do. So the heat is the one downside. Everything else is great.
There we go. All right. Glad to hear it. We got a couple of questions here, so why don't we jump into them? Woo. This one I'm going to assume is for Scott, but I'll throw it out to us anyway. Martin Costanzo says, as an amateur writer, what advice can you give to us? I certainly have some advice that I could give, but Vactor, is there anything you can throw out, advice that you might give to an amateur writer?
If I was giving advice to a writer, which I have no business doing because I have no experience writing, I would just say the advice that I've heard all the time: write what you know.
Mm-hmm. That's always a good one. I would say there's a couple of things that I always usually tell to young writers. The first thing is write, which I know sounds stupid, but this is something I used to teach sketch comedy writing in particular, but I've told the same thing. Like, I manage writers at my job, for journalistic purposes, and I've given advice there and stuff. But people are always like, how do I break into the industry? They'll ask me specifically with journalism, how do I break into journalism? And what I always like to tell them is, you just got to write stuff. You got to write whatever you can in whatever genre, in whatever place you can, whatever you can do. I always caution everybody to say the most important thing is get paid for it, whatever, like, you are worth something. Even at the beginning, your time is worth something. And there's too many places that'll say, oh, I'll pay you with exposure. Oh, we'll pay you with a piece of the ad revenue on the back end. They're never going to pay you. You're never going to get anything off of that. So get paid what you're worth. Might be low. That's fine, but get paid something. But just write stuff. This is very much based on my experience, but when I decided to go freelance writing, I was like, okay, I'm going to be a freelance writer. What does that mean? I don't know what that meant. And so I answered every ad that I could at Craigslist at the time and picked up jobs whenever people get them to me. I did everything from like writing blog posts to punching up people's resumes, again, as long as they paid me. For a while, I worked at, I don't know if you remember Nerve.com, a dating site. Ooh. They had a sex blog, which was mostly, frankly, about testing sex toys. I was the product tester for everything else that wasn't sex toys, which is not my area of expertise at all. But at least I was like, okay, I'm figuring out how to write short and punchy, get things in on a deadline, try to be reliable, try to be factual, all of these things that I'm learning. And in the meantime, I loved writing about TV. I loved writing fiction. I did my sketch comedy, other things. And the important thing to me is like, I just wrote it and put it up there. Like, I was in love with the AV Club's TV recaps back in the day, and it wasn't necessarily my goal to write for the AV Club, but I loved the way they did it, and I wanted to kind of figure it out. So I had a Tumblr blog. I just started doing recaps of TV on my Tumblr blog because I liked watching TV and I liked writing about it. And at that point, I didn't know what I was doing, but there was no pressure there. It was just all me, myself, putting it up there. And then ultimately, when I did have a chance to do jobs, I was able to send it to people and say, hey, I have these professional credits. They're not applicable to this TV journalism job, but here are these other things you can take a look at, so at least you know that I know the format. So I did both of those things at the same time. But I assume Martin's asking about fiction. I think the same thing is applicable. Like, this advice is always given by professional writers. Don't call yourself an amateur writer. Call yourself a writer. Just you are a writer if you're writing stuff. And this gets to the second part. I know I'm going on for a while here, but one of the biggest lessons that I used to teach my sketch comedy classes is if you have no idea what to write, start writing anyway. Because I believe very firmly your brain is working against you a lot of the time. It's stopping you from doing things. And what you got to do is work past not that writer's block, but that brain that's blocking you. So when I was writing a sketch, what I always found helped when I had no idea what I was going to write for a sketch for my comedy group, I would sit down at a Starbucks and I would literally start writing, "Man is in Starbucks, doesn't know what he's writing" as a sketch comedy sketch. And just try to write something in the format that I knew. And it was like pulling fingernails while I was writing it. But invariably, about halfway through that, what I would do is I would have another idea. And instead of going off to that other idea, I would just jot it down on the margin so I don't forget it. And I would finish the thing that I was currently writing. And the important part about that is then you are not tricking your brain, but training your brain into being like, okay, I wrote this terrible thing, but here's how you do something and here's how you finish it. Even if it's an abrupt ending, even if it's like doesn't work and it's bad, then you write that second idea. That second idea is probably also going to be pretty bad. But invariably, I found halfway through that, I had another idea. Again, I would jot it down on the margin and then write through, finish the other thing. So I was still training my brain to actually finish the thing. So by the time I got to the third thing, not only was I warmed up in terms of the writing, not only had I worked past those blocks, but I let myself know, okay, I know how to finish the thing, because it's very easy to stop something halfway through and not finish it. So that's my big advice there. Those two things is, one, just write whatever and don't worry about it too much. And two, trick your brain into allowing yourself to write, because there's too many excuses. I don't have the right pencils. I don't have,
Right.
the right software on my computer. None of that is true. In order to write, all you need to do is just write. And if it's bad, that's okay, because the large majority of stuff you're going to write is going to be bad, like
Right.
abjectly, objectively bad. And that's okay, because everybody is like that. So just work past it.
It's funny. This is like everything you said can be applied to YouTube. So like I said, I don't
Mhm.
have any experience writing, but I've been creating YouTube videos for the last year, and I noticed it was a lot of those things. You just got to press record. You just got to start talking into the camera. You just got to all these things. And once with experience and with time, you start to get more comfortable in front of the camera. You start to have better ideas. And even I noticed with my shorts, my YouTube shorts that I've been doing, I go back and look at the stuff I was doing a year ago, and I
Hmm.
was like, "Man, I was that bad?" And then I look at myself today, I was like, "Man, I'm way better." Even though I still think I'm bad today, it's like, "Man, a year ago, I was even worse." So I think it's just with time and with, that the practice makes perfect. You're gonna make bad stuff at the beginning, but you're gonna get better, especially if you have a passion for it. And like you said, if you're doing something that you love and just you have this something inside of you, and it's just gonna express outwardly, it's gonna be good if you keep on doing it. So consistency and just continuing to stick with it is really the key.
100%. Absolutely. Great answer. This is from Stray Bullet. Eddie, favorite news that came out of San Diego Comic Con this weekend? This was a interesting one because, of course, because of the strikes, the SAG strike and the WGA strike, which on the show we support unequivocally, just to be 100% clear. They're fighting for their rights, they're fighting for the money and the rights, and they deserve. The studios are wrong, but there was no TV or movie news other than animation that really came out of there. Actually, that's not true. The studios came anyway, and they're like, here you go, here's a bunch of news. No actors or writers are needed for this thing, which made me feel very icky, but that's kind of what they did anyway. But lots of comic book news as well. I mean, I will say, not to jump on you, Vactor, because it seemed like you had an answer here, but I think my favorite news out of San Diego Comic Con was seeing all of the comic book creators that I love be like, well, that was awesome. Because the movie and TV studios weren't here, there was actual focus on comic books. We had room to breathe. We didn't feel like second citizens. I loved hearing that. That gave me such joy.
100%. I'm the same way because for so many years, it just feels like it had been getting bigger and bigger and bigger towards the other things, movies, television, and the comic book side of Comic Con just seemed to be getting smaller and smaller. So this, I think, was a return to form of those days before the MCU, before a lot of these big time stuff. So I was seeing all the feeds and the news things coming out, and I was like, yeah, this is great. This is putting a focus back on comics and comic creators, which I think is fantastic. The only thing specifically for me, besides Marvel releasing the new Punisher and talking about that, was there was a bunch of Invincible stuff.
Hmm.
Adam Eve was getting. You talked about the special that came out. They dropped that. They talked about season 2 of Invincible coming out, and there's a video game coming out for Adam Eve, and so a lot of Invincible stuff in the Invincible world. So I was just loving all that news.
That was great. I will throw out there my favorite comic book announcement was Zoe Thorogood, who, if you don't know, is a phenomenal artist. She did Rain, the book that was based on Joe Hill's short
Yes,
story
yes, yes, yes.
recently. And gosh, I'm forgetting the name of the graphic novel she released last year that just bowled me over. But she is doing a young adult either graphic novel or series. I think it's a graphic novel, though, set in the world of hack slash. So it's taking Cassie
Ooh.
Hack and bringing her back to high school. And it's just the perfect marriage, I think, of creator and material. So I love hack slash. I love Zoe Thorogood. I'm very, very excited for that.
Nice.
Yeah. We got a question for you, Vactor. This is from Kevin. What is the pattern on the sheet billowing behind Vactor?
It's actually a Star Wars. It's Mandalorian and Baby Yoda or Grogu.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Love it. Nice. And we got one last one here. This is from Kevin again. What's a musical genre that needs more representation in comics? Classical music. We need more
Mm.
Mozart in comics. No, I don't think
Yes.
that. I mean, I don't know. We've talked a lot about books like Black Metal, and Pete loves, what's the name of the Daniel Warren Johnson book that he talks about incessantly?
Oh
Uh, oh my God, he's gonna kill me when
man,
he
now I'm
listens to this.
blanking on
He's gonna
it.
do. Have you ever seen the Kids in the Hall sketch where they're talking about Citizen Kane and the guy's like, "What's that movie with the newspaper publisher? You know the one?" And he's like, "Citizen Kane." He's like, "No, no, no, that's not it. It's the one with the sled." And he says, "Rosebud." He's like, "Citizen Kane, Citizen Kane, Murder Falcon." There we go. Michael Tillman said. So anyway. But there's a lot of stuff like that. Like I feel like punk and rock and metal, they definitely lend themselves very well to comics. But
Right.
what do you think? What's a genre that you would love to see?
I think for me it would be more. I'm a huge R&B fan. I love hip hop. There's I think they've been getting a lot more voices lately, and a lot of, especially with the creators that are growing up on hip hop and growing up in that medium and that musical uh, taste in their ear. I think hip hop has been getting a lot of love from comics lately. But how about jazz? How about some
Hmm.
jazz standards? Let's get some.
Have you been reading? There's a series from Image. I don't know. I can't remember any title of anything right now, but it is. Oh my God, the guy. Jesus, my memory is terrible right now. It's Deep Cuts is the name of it. It
Oh,
is a series. It's all about like jazz and the blues, and each issue is an oversized like 40 to 60 page story set in different time periods, focusing on different aspects of it, telling these done in one stories about musicians, and it does lead into jazz and the blues, and it's awesome. Highly recommend you
oh
check it out.
man, I got
Yeah.
to check this out. They've got connecting covers. Yeah, this is something I'm going to add this to my list immediately.
Yeah, it's very, very
Mm.
cool. I've been really blown away by every issue of that. Kevin says yacht rock in here, and I'll tell you what, I know he's joking. I'd be into it. It would work.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it. All right. That is it for your audience questions. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Now, listen, normally we do trivia, but of course, Pete is gone, so we're going to skip that. Instead, we are going to go directly to what you are looking forward to that's coming out this week. Factor, what's coming out this week that you're particularly excited about?
Well, I am a huge, if you can't tell, I'm a huge Spider-Man fan. So
Hmm.
anytime there's a new Amazing book, I'm all over it. Loving the when the Ed McGuinness issues come out, that's when it's like, oh yeah, I can dig deep into that. So Amazing, I'm really looking forward to. Mark Miller's Nightclub is ending at issue 6, and I have been enjoying it. Also a huge Mark Miller fan, so anything that he puts out in the Millerverse, I'm a huge fan of. And this Nightclub book has been a lot of fun for me. But also, I'm a huge Mark Waid fan, and he's
Hmm.
coming out with Superman: The Last Days of Lex Luthor, #1, and Brian Hitch is doing the art on that. So those are two of my favorite creators. You can't push me away, can't keep me away from a Mark Waid book.
Yeah, we're going to be reviewing that in our Stack podcast, which comes out Wednesdays at 9 a.m. in the Stack feed, in the Comic Book Club feed. And it's out today, so I think I could say
Yes.
it's great. I mean, the art's
Ooh.
amazing, and Mark Waid's great, and, it's good stuff. There's a ton of great stuff that's coming out this week. As usual, I like comics. I will give a shout out to Berserker Poetry of Madness from Boom Studios, which is spinning off of the Keanu Reeves Matt Kint title. This one is by Steve Scroce, who is doing the art and the writing. And without spoiling too much, it's wild, and it's bloody, and it's ridiculous in exactly the way that you want from Berserker and Steve Scroce, so very excited about that one. Also, a bunch of titles are wrapping up. The Neighbors, which is one of my favorite horror books right now, its last issue is coming out, and it's been very twisted and weird and interesting. Also, Wolverine. Pete's hated this run. Justin and I have absolutely loved it. It's pitted an army of Wolverines against an army of beasts, and it's really...
saw that. Yeah.
Very messed up, but very cool. So looking forward to that. And one of my favorite titles of the year, honestly, like I know that sounds like hyperbole, but really, The Seasons Have Teeth from Boom Studios, which is about these anthropomorphized seasons, the guy who's trying to take pictures of them as he travels around the country and around Europe. It's really deep, really interesting, and the art is absolutely gorgeous. So highly recommend those. And before we wrap up here, though, Vactor, what would you like to plug? What would you like to plug on your end? Where should people check you out?
Yes, you can check me out on all of the social media platforms. I'm on Threads, I'm on Instagram, TikTok, but YouTube is my bread and butter. YouTube.com/Vactor. That's where I'm putting out, like I was saying, shorts. I'm trying to do 5 days a week and take the weekends off and do different character profiles and more Star Wars content. We got the Ahsoka show coming up, so I'm going to be putting out some stuff leading up to the show, and then once the show is out. So very excited about that. But then also each week I'm trying to get comic book content creators on and share their stories and their canon events. So all of that is at youtube.com/Vactor.
Awesome. Vactor, thank you so much for subbing in today. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you again. Thanks for coming by.
Thank you for having me. Anytime, I will always return because I love the Comic Book Club.
I love it. Thank you. And for all of you out there, a couple of things before we go. We want to thank Scott Hoffman for coming on. Don't forget to check out Nostalgia from Comixology. Next week, we're going to have a big show here. Jamie Rutante and Vin Lavallo from Archie Comics are going to be here to talk about all the great stuff they've been doing. Also, Ethan S. Parker and Griffin Sheridan are going to be here to talk about their new book, Kill Your Darlings. You can check out Sons of a Gun, our DC podcast. Weekly, we've been doing a couple of news podcasts. We're going to try to do more required reading episodes as well, where we dive into books that our dad, James Gunn, has recommended. Also, Marvel Vision, our Marvel podcast, we're going to be wrapping up Secret Invasion this week, everybody's favorite TV show, so check that out. Riverdale After Dark, our Riverdale podcast, is coming out after the episodes. We've got just a couple left, folks, so check it out. Very exciting. That show is wrapping up. Patreon.com/Comic Book Club to support this show and all the shows we do. You can subscribe on Apple, Android, Spotify, not Stitcher anymore. Don't subscribe on Stitcher. Switch to something else, or otherwise the app of your choice. At Comic Book Live on Twitter, Comic Book Club Live on Instagram, Comic Book Club Live on TikTok, comicbookclublive.com. For this podcast and many more, until next time, good night! Thanks so much, everybody. Thank you again, Vactor. Have a lovely night.